you laugh.
So Neil's not here today, obviously, as you've gathered. He's on his holidays, well-deserved holiday too. And
Gemma?
Yes, Gemma, the current wife, is with me instead. So I was going to do the podcast by myself. I said to Neil, you go, because he was going to do it. He was going to do it from Devon. And I said, no, have a break. You need a break. And so I said I would do it by myself.
The Fujicast.
And then Gemma said, I know what, I'll come and do it with you. And this is the start of the show, but we're actually an hour into recording because we've made so many mistakes. And if you wait till the end of the show, you can hear some of those mistakes. So you must wait till the end.
None of them are mine.
So, as I said, we have been doing this for quite a long time this afternoon, and there was a Patreon bump to the front question from Joshua Lathman, which was huge question, really, really interesting. However, there's no way we can read it again, so we will. I promise you, Joshua, it will be in next week's show when the professional is back. So we're going to just crack on, go straight to it, straight to the Facebook group, and Gemma's going to take the first question. Off you go.
This is a question from Nick from Greece. A question for Kevin. Let's say I wanted to create a site using a platform A, WordPress, and then listening to you every Monday, I decide to move to a platform B, Squarespace. Is it possible to transform my content, or do I have to start over?
So you can actually transfer your content from WordPress to Squarespace if you so wish, and vice versa. In fact, there is an option in Squarespace to import directly from WordPress sites. You just put in your username and password, and it will do its best to go and get the data and bring it all in. However, I did find that wasn't particularly reliable. So typically what I would do when I was moving everything from WordPress to Squarespace is I would export from WordPress via XML. So in WordPress, you go down to settings. I think it's called import export, and you export just a standard WordPress XML file. And then you can go to Squarespace, and under the import options, instead of choosing WordPress, choose an XML file, point to that XML file, and it will bring it all in. It's worth noting, though, that if you've got a lot of data, you might want to do it in stages rather than just one huge, massive file, because the Squarespace, I'm not sure if they publicly say there's a file size limit, but I found that it just didn't work with big files. So smaller chunks, and it's certainly possible. I did it for f16.click, brought everything in, and that was a huge site. You need a little bit of patience, but certainly doable. So thanks for that, Nick. Good question. You've probably gathered that we're both in Bunker Malmesbury rather than Neil's swanky studio. And so, let's just crack on. Here's a question from Johan Borhead. He says, hi, Barbie. Hi, Ken, which is very apt.
Yep. You be Barbie, I'll be Ken.
He says, when you fall in love with a camera, what are the three things you mostly tend to like? The looks, the image quality, or the shape and the grip? Or is it technological or software functionality like high frame rate, film simulations, etc.? Well, I think I can probably speak for both Neil and myself when we say that the most important thing is functionality. As a professional photographer, has to be, you have to be getting a camera that does the job for you, whether that is from a filming point of view or a stills point of view. It just has to do the job. But actually, also enjoyability of using the camera is really, really important. I used to have DSLRs back in the day, and DSLRs are different now, and I get that, and the things have changed, shapes and ergonomics and all that kind of stuff. But for me, it was just a big black box that I would take to a wedding, and I never really enjoyed using it. And then when the original X100 come along, it was it was a pleasure to use it. It was a real challenge to use that first camera, that first X100. But I knew straight away that I was enjoying using that camera a lot more. So I think functionality has got to be kind of the preference as a professional photographer, and then ultimately, not so much for me about what it looks like, but the size of it, the kind of feel of it in my hands, that kind of stuff. All right, back to the Facebook group. Thank you so much for those who are putting questions in there, by the way. We do need more. Of course, we always need more. The more the merrier. So keep them coming. And they don't have to be about photography necessarily, as this one isn't. This is from Jake Hilder, and he says, question, big exclamation mark. What does everyone wear when photographing weddings? I get roasting when concentrating, so just smart jeans, shirt and a tie, tweedy style waistcoat, and in brackets mainly to keep the belly and shirt in place, comfy shoes or boots. Well, I'm going to let Gemma explain what I look like when I go to a wedding.
Well, when you first started, you used to look like Johnny Cash. Do you remember? Everything was black, and you had like a black. Did you have a little black skinny tie?
Yep.
Yeah. And then you had a little geography teacher phase where you had like a tweedy jacket and chino-y type things. And then you had your Columbo phase. But then you went to the gym a lot and you had your quite, sexy Zara man about town look. So I quite like that one. But normally, white shirt, black or blue trousers, no tie, maybe a jacket if it's winter, and some brown shoes.
Yeah,
like brown shoes.
You paint a picture.
You've got blue shoes.
I have
Elvis style.
I got blue suede shoes. Yeah, yeah. Pretty much, she's nailed it there. In terms of what I wear, I don't wear denim trousers, but as comfortable trousers as I can possibly find. With an elasticated waist these days, and white shirt, and I'll take a jacket. One key thing is to have two shirts in the car though, because if you do find, especially now, the weather's changed here in the UK, this last week anyway, and I find that you somewhere halfway through the wedding you might think, oh, I might need to change my shirt, so have a spare shirt in the car, be useful. But yeah, I mean, that's it, isn't it? I remember going to a wedding a few years back and went just as I would normally go. And I suddenly realised it was a very, 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 very high-end wedding, and I didn't look very, 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 very high-end in what I was wearing. So I had to pop back to the car and dig out a tie and change the shirt into the one that was a bit least high-end, and
a bit more high-end.
Yeah, a bit more high-end even. And that was it. So, wedding attire. I do see the videographers. I mean, Neil's got some great stories on this as well, but some of the videographers that turn up, honestly, they look like they're from Busted, the band or something. They just turn up with, ripped jeans and T-shirts. I think it was Neil that was saying he was at a wedding once and a videographer turned up and he had a great big Guns N' Roses T-shirt on and everything. And, you do need to just take a little bit of responsibility, I think. Right. Okay. Next question, and then we will we'll move quickly into the interview. Going up. Okay. So here's a question from Daniel Kiss.
Daniel Kiss.
I know there's so many cool names, isn't there? And he says, would it make sense to buy the X100F in 2021 instead of the V? And, ultimately, that comes down to budget and requirements. Of course, the X100V is a better camera than the X100F, hands down, simple as that. However, just because the X100V came out, it doesn't mean that the X100F became a lesser camera. It's always been the same camera, and for a long time, it was the best X100 in the range. So if the X100F does what you need it to do, and it's a budget thing, then get your X100F. There's some great deals on at the moment in terms of second-hand ones as well. If you really need that kind of extra capability in terms of the autofocus and the new lens and the video capabilities and all of that stuff, then the X100V is going to be best. But honestly, the time makes no difference. And we just had a question about kind of the look and feel of cameras and the retro nature of them, and there's many people who are getting back into film photography with older cameras and everything. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, really does just go down to what you want, what you need, what you can afford, and I mean, the X100F was my favourite camera for a very long time, even over the X Pro 2 and the XT range, all that kind of stuff. I love that X100F. So yeah, your mileage may vary.
Or you could just lie to your wife and buy an X100V in the middle of a lockdown, pretend it's something else.
I didn't pretend it was something else. I pretended it was I told you it was an X100V. I just pretended that it was on loan from Fujifilm. All right, so this is from Paul.
Is that a silence?
Zillard. What do you reckon? Zillard?
Zillard, I reckon it's one of your favourite silence.
Silent letters. Pointless things, silent letters. What a waste of space. But it might not be. It could be Zillard, or it could be Zillard, or it could be Zillard. Anyway, Paul is bringing us back to episode 168 when we did have a question about whether Fujifilm would release 35mm film cameras that uses the XF lenses. And we basically waffled through the answer because we didn't really know the technicalities of it, but Paul's come to the rescue. He says, aside from the financial business cases, it's not technically possible, as the XF lenses cover the APS-C sensor and not full-frame 35mm film. Additionally, the flange distance of mirrorless cameras is too short to allow for a DSLR mirror box or an adapter. And there you go. He also goes on to say, regarding the sharpness of the lens of the X100V versus the character of the older lenses, I suggest people go into the Q menu and adjust sharpness to a negative number. Experiment with different values, aperture, and subject distance. Of course, there's always Gaussian blur in post-production. Now, I remember when the X100V was being discussed, we had a product meeting and some of the photographers were invited to that product meeting. And one of the questions that came up actually from the developers, from the designers of the camera was, will the new lens lose the character that the older lens kind of inherited? And it was muted that there might even be an option in the camera that kind of just softened things a little bit, but it was put to bed pretty quick because it just doesn't make any sense. And as Paul pointed out, that you can always just reduce the sharpness slightly, or you can adjust it in post production if you really want it to look like the previous lens, the character in the previous lens. I can't really tell a difference, I have to say, between the X100V and the X100F in terms of the character of the lens. All I know is that it's sharper, it's quicker, it's faster, it's just better all round, generally better. But yeah, so thanks for that, Paul. Good. I'm glad we've sorted that out. Right. So Gemma's got a question for us, I think. Apparently,
I got a question for you and Neil. Neil will have to answer it next week. Back in lockdown days when you were doing the daily podcast in the front room, you got all excitable about you were going to go out and shoot street photography, and you were going to go up to people, and you were going to be braver, and you were, as soon as you and Neil were allowed back out, you were on it. You were because you were feeling like you couldn't go anywhere, not even out for more than one dog walk a day, and then you were going to forget about all your insecurities of walking up to people and asking them to take their pictures, and you were going to do it, and you haven't done it.
No, I haven't done it actually. And funny enough, the interview we've got coming up with Spencer, he mentions he did a little project where he forced himself to take a picture of a stranger every day for a year. And we talked about that a little bit in the interview, which you can hear in a bit. But no, you're right, I haven't. But to be honest with you, I still haven't gone anywhere, really. I haven't been to London, I haven't been anywhere. Workshops are still not really starting up. So the plan, my original plan, when we discussed that, was that Neil and I would grab each other, we'd go to London, and we'd force each other into this out of our comfort zones, and just kind of grab strangers and ask them if we could take their portraits. But you're right, it hasn't happened.
Don't you think you're always waiting for the perfect time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's going on? Yeah, it's like character assassination of some kind. So this question is from Girish from Taiping in Malaysia. And Gemma's going to read this.
Dear Neil and Kevin, I don't often write in, perhaps only once before when I couldn't access a particular episode on Overcast. I confess I've not been much up to date on the podcast due to being swamped with work and family responsibilities. Listening to your podcast has become the equivalent of a particular dish or beverage one so often desires, to the extent it becomes a defining favourite, but one doesn't get the chance to savour it as much as one likes. It's nice.
I normally just go yada 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 at that point.
Oh, could have told me. I've reached episode 160 finally, and have attained some sort of regularity and been able to tune in more. The run of episodes beginning with Ziza as a guest and culminated with Pete Reed as a guest on the show was amongst, if not the best, I've had the pleasure of listening to podcast-wise, any podcast for that matter. The consecutive episodes had what the French say, je ne sais quoi. There was banter, there was reflection, there was a lot more. At the risk of making this missive longer, I shall refrain from mentioning. Kevin often comes across as a practical person, sometimes acerbic. The interview he conducted with Pete Reed was, not to put too fine a point on it, a form of humanity at its best. My respect and esteem for the both of you has risen significantly. The interview, if it may be referred to as such, perhaps a conversation between two friends would be more appropriate. As Reddit mentions, Kevin remembered the human. Respect for others with their different qualities and weaknesses. I think Pete got as much out of the interview as the audience who were privileged to listen in, perhaps more. I have a question, or possibly a question statement. I apologise if it has been discussed before. What does success mean in photography? If one makes his or her living from it, well, that's apparent success. For photographers who don't make a living and regard it as a hobby or a pursuit or some form of enthusiasm, perhaps it would be more difficult to define. Would success in this group mean consistent self-satisfaction concerning the pictures one has made? I was struck by this line of thought, hearing someone write in saying that they were unhappy taking pictures which they didn't feel were particularly good. I came into photography fascinated by myriad possibilities a digital camera was capable of, and gradually gear seemed to take predominance. This has been reset since I've embarked on film photography and receiving neutral scans. Post-processing seems largely unnecessary. Perhaps success is being happy with oneself and recognising and accepting limitations with a prevalent sense of gratitude in being able to do something which one loves. I've written too much. My apologies. You guys take care and keep safe. Kind regards, Girish.
Yeah, well, it's a lovely email, isn't it?
It's a lovely email, and I really didn't do it any justice because I'm rubbish at reading aloud.
So thanks for the kind words, by the way, about the interviews and everything. And of course, you know, we all try our best when we're interviewing people. And I think that when it comes to this idea of success in photography, Girish, you alluded to it in terms of, is it simply people are paying you and that means you're successful? To a certain extent, I think that's true. But also, it comes down to what makes you happy and what makes you feel like you're successful. I would hazard a guess that, you know, Neale and I, you know, if somebody said to me, do you think you've been successful in your career? I would say, yeah, probably I have done. I've done pretty much everything I wanted to do, and I'm kind of carrying on with that. And I think the same for Neale as well. I mean, Neale has photographed nearly 1,000 weddings. You know, that's definitely, you don't photograph 1,000 weddings if you're not successful. So I think ultimately, you know, the idea of, you know, going back to the basics, or not necessarily the basics, but going back to shooting film and you know, looking at the neutral scans of it and being happy with the pictures, is that a form of success? Yeah, of course it is, because you're just being happy with it. And ultimately, certainly if you don't have to make money from it, then success is simply whether you enjoy it and whether people enjoy looking at those images. That's really what it comes down to. And it doesn't matter what those images, whether they're taken on a phone, whether they're film, whether they're taken on medium format, makes no difference whatsoever. And you know, I think that's a kind of benchmark of success, really, is, you know, if it makes somebody smile or somebody think, or, you know, in 20 years' time, you know, people are probably fed up with me saying this, but, you know, the benign pictures of today are the nostalgic pictures of the future. So success in a certain sense might have to wait. But, you know, we all look at books and everything these days, and pictures on the internet and pictures in magazines and newspapers and everything. And we often think, yeah, wow, that's incredible. You know, I'd love to be published, or I'd love to, you know, have a book published and, you know, be a newspaper photographer or reporter. Yeah, I mean, that's success. But, you know, ultimately, like I said, you know, really it just comes down to being happy, doesn't it? I think, you know, when you're in a creative industry like this, and, you know, it kind of goes back to the question we had earlier about technology and, you know, what you enjoy, really. I think it has to come to that. So, yeah, thanks, Girish. That was nice. I'm not sure. I think that may not be our first question from Malaysia, but certainly one of the first ones. So thank you very much. Right, on to the interview. So I'm going to ask you a question, Gemma. You know Patrick Larocque, you met him.
Love Patrick Larocque.
Yes, everybody loves Patrick. That's enough of that. But one of the things he did was he said to his wife, I'm going to go travelling around Canada for a month by myself. And so he did. And in fact, Spencer Wyn, who is a former Fujifilm ambassador but a phenomenal photographer, did a similar thing, and you can hear all about it in this interview. So I was really intrigued. I've been going through your website with a fine-tooth comb and stopping at almost every single picture. But there's a wonderful line, and I presume it's one of your lines. It says, "One can only truly tell a story of a people if you have lived with the people." And tell me a little bit more about that, and what you mean by that.
I've seen a lot of journalists standing on the edges and looking at the situation because they don't want to put themselves or their thoughts into the story. But I think to really understand it, you've got to come away from the sidelines and get right into it. And as long as you are really true to the story and not make it about yourself, then that's really the perspective that I like. So whether it's been in my many trips in China, being in really small rural communities, or in India where we worked on a project for 2 years, and a lot of that was from the position of the people who lived in the slum that was affected by the gas disaster. We had to get sort of right into the middle of it to really see and tell the story sympathetically rather than from an observation standpoint.
So I understand you spent it was 2 years working on the 30th anniversary of the Bhopal gas disaster. So that must have been quite an intense time.
It was. This was a story that had to be told from a business standpoint. So Jennifer Wells, who is the writer, she's a brilliant storyteller, but also has a really solid financial journalism background. So because this was a story about a big American transnational company, it was in essence a business story, but it had a huge human toll to it as well. So it happened back in the mid 80s, and a lot of people, I was aware of it just peripherally at the time, but a lot of people today don't know about it. So this was a story worth retelling, to sort of a younger generation, because the corporate responsibilities haven't changed. The way people behave haven't changed. So it was really an important story to tell. And in order to tell it really well, we needed to tell it from inside the slum that was across the street, that was devastated that night. And also from the point of view of the survivors. And many of them told us that the dead were the lucky ones. So that was a really important story to tell.
For those that don't understand what happened, just briefly tell us about the disaster.
There's a chemical or a compound called methyl isocyanate, or Mike, and that was kind of the magic bullet for the promise of a green revolution in Indian agriculture. And it's a great idea, but in order to keep it stable, it had to be kept cool and in these huge tanks underground. But the local Union Carbide plant, in order to save money, they turned certain machines off to save money, and some of that was cooling. And to make a long story short, a little bit of water got into the system, created an exothermic reaction, and the thing blew. And rather than going up the huge tower to escape far above where people live, it just blew at the ground level. And because it's heavy, this cloud of white smoke drifted across the street and into the community. And it was just after midnight, so most people were sleeping, and they sleep on the ground. So this kind of fog just drifted across, and it was killing people. And I think thousands of people died that night, and others just ran in terror. And it was a horrible, horrible tragedy. And that could easily happen today. So that was one of the reasons we needed to tell that story from that perspective. And lying in the same home as one of the survivors, in the same wooden shack on the ground with the rats, that was the essence of that kind of storytelling.
And how did the people react to you being there? Did they presumably wanted to tell the story? But how about reacting with you personally as a photographer?
Well, we stuck out like sore thumbs, obviously, because we're not part of the community, and it's not a place that sees a lot of tourists in this area because it's not a tourist area. But we did have a survivor who was our guide, and his family of 10 were wiped out that night, except for him, who was 5 months old, who was wrapped in a blanket by his older sister and ran. So he was in a unique position to know the story, know the people, and he's also taken other journalists around. There was a film made with Martin Sheen. So the people in the community have been used to seeing outsiders come in, and they're all very excited to see you. But it's only when you talk to the older people and you spend time with them that they then can relax with you and tell their experiences. But it's important, and you don't go in and just raise your camera and start taking pictures. You have to spend time with people, get them comfortable, and then just to slowly bring out your camera. And it was pretty easy that way. But they have seen a lot of journalists wandering around occasionally. So it wasn't hostile or anything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the pictures, I think, kind of demonstrate that really. So the story is called The Ghost of Bhopal. And that just what you said there kind of goes back to that quote, really, that you can only really tell a story of the people if you live amongst them, and that really does demonstrate it. There's some beautiful portraits and some really beautiful kind of storytelling pictures there as well. I'm intrigued by the ones of presumably the interior pictures of the remains of the workplace. You've got the big green walls of machines that have been left derelict. Is it still, or when you were there, presumably everything was just left and people just run away?
Yeah, I mean, people just ran. Now, throughout the years, there's a wall around it, and people can still hop the wall. That room, that control room that you were just referencing, it's been stripped of all its copper wiring. It's been, it's seen a lot of vandalism, and they do have, one or two guards on site, but it's pretty much just as it's left. It's a very dangerous place to go in. The lab, you may have seen the one with all the bottles of chemicals. Jennifer, when we were in the lab with, the guards are walking around with us, she was about to put her purse on the table, on one of the lab tables, so she could make some notes. And one of the guards just yelled, "No, don't," because the dust is still highly toxic. There's one containment building that's filled with 40 tons of cyanide that still is there. They've bricked it up. So that in itself is a disaster waiting to happen, because it's eventually going to go into the groundwater and start the whole process again.
There's echoes of Chernobyl in that story, isn't
Very
there?
much so, yeah.
On a lighter note, one of the other projects that I'm intrigued with as well on your website is called, well, you've titled it Selfie Nation. And it, obviously it is what it is. It's people taking selfies, and beyond the pictures themselves, which obviously are great, I also notice, combined with this, that you've done a lot of aerial photography from hot air balloons and various kind of airborne devices. So with the selfies, the phones, the drones that we have now, how do you think in your time that photography for the masses has changed?
I'm just referencing the selfies. That's really just, obviously, it's very tongue in cheek. I'm constantly amazed at one's fascination with themselves in their environment. I don't like being in front of the camera. I'm rarely in front of the camera. I prefer to be behind it. But these days, I mean, not just now, but people have a fascination with placing themselves in their environment. And I asked somebody once, why are you taking a selfie here? I think it was the Grand Canyon. And they said, well, because I want to prove that I've been here, which I guess is, legitimate. But I said, well, can't you just take a picture and tell people you were here? And the person said, well, no one would believe me. I just thought that was really, really interesting. I don't know, from a sociological standpoint, that we have to prove that we're here. And some of them are just kind of silly, and they're fun. There was one guy he's on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and he's taking a selfie of himself, but the problem is he's looking at the Grand Canyon. So I presume his picture is of himself with the car parked behind him. So, so they're kind of funny, and it's just kind of my little poke at, people's fixations.
Yeah. It is. I totally agree with you. It's a very bizarre thing, selfies, but it's the world we are in. Mm-hmm. But the whole kind of elevated photography that you were doing in air balloons and things like that, has that kind of gone away now with the advent of drones, do you think?
Yes and no. I mean, that started actually, the whole idea of that started when I knew we were going to go to India to work on the Bhopal story. I needed a way to get, I wanted a way to get shoot from an elevated position. And I didn't own a drone. In those days, you would have to spend a lot of money, and then there would be local restrictions against it. So I thought, well, what's another way I could get my camera up there? And I thought, a kite. So I did a fair amount of research, and I've got several kites. Settled on one that behaved really, really well. It was quite stable. And it's 9 feet across, and it's your typical sort of delta wing kind of kite that every kid plays with. But on a good wind, it could lift about 15 to 20 pounds. So once the kite is up there, about 100 feet, and it's behaving properly, then I would attach to the line, so about 100 feet down from the kite, a picavette, which is kind of like a camera mount system that balances itself. And it also has a little bit of a radio control button that I can control from where I'm standing. And I can pitch the camera up and down. I can turn it 360 degrees. And because I was shooting with the X100, it was pretty wide field of view. So I could just get it over top of what I wanted. And I couldn't see what it was taking a picture of, but I could look up and see where it was pointed. So that really fascinated me. I ended up not taking it to India, but I did use it quite a bit for the athletes' village just down the street here for the Pan Am Games. So documenting the building of the village, which is now a condo community. But and that was a really great way of getting the camera up, 100 or 200 feet, and getting really terrific aerials. And with a pretty stable wind, you could get even really close to the top of a crane with quite decent precision. But then as the buildings grew up, it kind of churned up the airflow, so the kites behaved a little bit more erratically. So at that point, I shifted to, instead of flying during a windy day, flying during a day with no wind and an 8-foot wide helium balloon with about a 3 mil poly skin. And that could easily hold a pretty heavy camera, and I could operate it the same way. The construction company, this construction team building the village, they brought in a big shipping container, and that was what I used as my garage for the balloon. I just kept it inflated and parked it in there. And on a day that there was no wind, I would just walk over and pull it out and start taking photographs, in a snowstorm, or not really storms, but when it was snowing or in the heat of the summer. It was a really great way to get photographs without having to go the drone route.
Yeah. Now, would you hang a $10,000 GFX from one of those balloons?
Would it have to be mine?
Yeah, good answer. Yeah, let's leave that then. Honestly, I'm looking at there's so much stuff I want to talk to you about in terms of the project. I'm terrible because I look at the places other people live and think, oh, I wish I was there so I could experience these things. And of course, we have good experiences in the UK as well. They're just very different. But the Canada 150 and the USA 150, this idea. Patrick Larocque did a similar thing. He just woke up one morning and said to his wife, "I'm going. That's it. I'm off. I'm going for 3 weeks. I'm going coast to coast." And so, what's the story behind your 150 stories?
Well, the Canada 150 is the 150th anniversary of Canada. So I knew that the GFX 50 was coming out in the future, and Canada, it's a big camera. It's a big sensor. Canada's a huge country. So I pitched to Fujifilm Canada that we celebrate not only the birthday of Canada, but also this large camera and large sensor by taking it from the Pacific, right on the shore of the Pacific Ocean on Vancouver Island, all the way across to the east coast of Newfoundland, and just document this country with this camera. And the two worked really well together. But it was and it had to be done, and I wanted it to be done in 1 month. It was just a bit over 14,000 kilometers, and it was tricky. Picking the month was tricky. So I picked April because I thought, oh well, there would be some nice flowers perhaps in the prairies, and by the time we got to Toronto or Ontario, things would start greening up. But it didn't work that way at all. There were still 8-foot snowbanks and impassable roads in the Rockies. We had storm clouds over the prairies, which looked beautiful. And in the prairies, we were having lunch, and we heard some people at the tables talking about the fact that there was a snowstorm happening in Newfoundland. So by the time we got to Newfoundland, a ferry was stuck in the ice a few times, so that dashed one of our hopes. But we did end up the trip, with these absolutely fascinating and beautiful, beautiful icebergs on the year of one of their heaviest iceberg seasons. So it was really just a fun way to pitch, the GFX coming out, and also combining it with the story of this country, which is enormous, and has varied landscapes from marine life or marine lands to prairies to mountains.
It's I'm looking at the thumbnail view of that page right now, and I really encourage everybody to go and look at it because it's so well curated in terms of the colors and the flow, and the season, the winter season, as you can see it. But I think it's hard to pick a kind of favorite picture, but I suppose the one that jumps out of me, and I think it's because of the flash of orange, is the boat pilot in his orange suit, and there's these big storm clouds and this big rock of ice, and I also have a GFX, so I know it's not the easiest thing to be shooting with when you're on in the middle of the sea, in the middle of a storm. So
well, it got swamped with a lot of salt water. At one point, the wave came into the Zodiac and then bounced back out, swamping the camera. But it was fine. It just kept going.
Yeah. Now, tell me about the time that you were, was it hunting trips with the Inuits? Is that story there?
Yeah, I've been up to the high Arctic a few times. The first time, actually, I went out to paint because I was into painting landscapes for a while, and befriended this slightly older guy in the town, and he was going out to a hunting party out on the sea ice. This is in June, so there's still about 8 feet of ice, and gave me a snowmobile and said, keep up. And it took about 6 or 8 hours to get out to the hunting party, stay there for a couple of days, and then came back. With one of the Inuit boys on the back of my snowmobile, but I'd been up there previously, or I've been up there again since then to go up the coast of Greenland and back into the across the strait and into the Northwest Passage. But that was also a really great way to explore and tell the story of Northern Canada, a place that is really expensive to get to, but also really, really beautiful and rich in visuals while we have it. So that's another interesting story.
We were chatting just beforehand about the nighttime photography that you seem to be getting into. What kind of, first of all, what does that entail, and what kind of technology, what kind of camera systems would you use for something like that?
Pretty much using what I've got, which is X100 and XT3 and my beloved X Pro 2s. They all take fantastic images in the dark. You've just got to kind of figure out, what lens you're going to use. So something wide, prime, and fast, and then just, really just taking multiple pictures at ISOs that start at about 100 or 1600 ISO and go up to maybe 6400. Shooting exposures that are about 10 to 15 seconds in length, because you don't want to go too much farther than that, because the stars will have some movement to them, and so they won't be these nice little fine pinpricks of light. They'll start looking like a little grain of rice because they're moving all night. So just a solid tripod and a camera, and not being afraid to put the ISO up really high. I've shot the night sky at 10,000 ISO, but what I do is I will take pictures that are maybe 10 to 12 seconds in length, so there's no star movement. There is a fair amount of noise, but if you take 20 pictures, using the built-in intervalometer, 20 pictures of the same scene, and then stack those and align them, because the stars will have drifted a bit. Once they're aligned and stacked, you can then just basically eliminate all the noise by setting them all to lighten in the blend mode. So that noise that you do get from the high ISO is virtually gone by the time you're done. And then you take a long exposure of the ground at a lower ISO, so it's nice and clean. And then you just basically blend the ground, that nice clean ground, with the stacked and realigned sky final image.
Yeah, I think that the blend mode options in Photoshop are fantastic, aren't they? There's so much control over them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also, I presume, now I know that you do workshops for the night photography, but I'm guessing you have some amazing, like in the UK, seriously, Spencer, it's just been cloudy since about 1975. So we just don't really have the chance. Where do you go? Where do you go to get your dark skies?
Well, there's a great feature, a great map called Dark Sky Finder, and it shows you graphically and by color coding the really hot spots. So obviously around Toronto, London, all these major cities, they're white hot, so they'll be white. And then as you get away from those, the colors kind of cool down a little bit, and eventually into these black areas that have no light pollution. So that's what I consult when I go on trips, or when I do my all-night night photography workshops. We're pretty lucky here in Ontario, because although Toronto and the greater Toronto area is really, really bright, it doesn't take long at all to get into an area that's really dark. So, we shoot at a dark sky preserve a couple of about 2 hours north of Toronto, and then through the night we continue moving north, and then eventually into a very large provincial park called Algonquin Park. And there it is truly dark. It's far enough away from any village or town or city that the skies are truly black around the time of a new moon. And because of that, then the stars are just breathtaking, and the Milky Way is really, really obvious in these places. So you don't have to get too far, but it is handy to check that map out just for interest's sake, just to see what we've done to our planet in terms of light pollution.
So in terms of business and workshops and COVID and all that kind of stuff, I suppose that's had a big impact. But I'm eyeing up your workshops now. Insatiable Istanbul 2022. That sounds, I might book myself on that,
Well, that was, so 2019, I did in Istanbul, the first Istanbul workshop with a client that was on the Paris workshop that I did with Ian McDonald, who I know you had on your show ages ago. He's from the West Coast. I just fell in love with Istanbul. It's now my favorite city. And so the next year, last year was supposed to be a 5-day Istanbul workshop, and then another 10-day Eastern Turkey, and Southeast Turkey, so kind of close to the Syrian border in that Mesopotamia area. But of course, it had to be canceled because of COVID, and same with this summer as well. I was supposed to be in Turkey right about now. So those have all had to go away. In a couple of weeks, I will be doing the first all-night workshop here in Ontario for the first time in a long time.
I always ask our guests at the end 2 quick questions, and the first one is, what would you say to an 18-year-old Spencer Wyn? What would you whisper in his ears?
Don't be shy. I was brought up with, my dad is British, and, children should be seen and not heard, and don't get into people's faces and all that. So, I was terribly afraid of approaching people, and, but now, as I tell some of my students, it can be nerve-wracking if you stop somebody on a street and want to do their portrait, but push yourself and don't be shy. And I did a project to get over that. I did a project where I did a portrait of a stranger every day for a year, and I think maybe 3 or 4 said no, which I was absolutely amazed at. But it certainly got me over my discomfort from shooting, photographing strangers, and that shyness that we carry around with us. So I would say, just be bold and don't be shy, just because nobody's going to yell at you.
Quite right. And you're not the first person I've heard say that about the portraits, just going out and forcing yourself to get portraits. Now, how would you have done that? Were you using an X100, or maybe it was before the Fujifilm times?
No, I was using an X100, and that helps as well. As it's very discreet, it's very quiet. If someone sees you coming towards them with a big 70-200, well, they start to get a little nervous. But with this, it just looks like a point and shoot. Which in essence it is almost. So I was using that, and I would just carry a little off-camera flash if I needed to, if it was in the early morning hours. I just put it in my left hand so I can get a little bit of side light, just to get some interesting lighting. But that was it, just something stripped down.
The final question that I always ask people also is, if you could choose one photographer, either alive or dead, to spend the day shooting with, who might it be, and why?
I would really like to spend the day with that photography teacher I had back in 79 to 84 when I was at the Ontario College of Art. His name was Ken Bell, and he was in the Canadian Armed Forces as a photographer. Just a fascinating guy. Landed at Normandy. Luckily, obviously, he wasn't killed. But his stories, I don't know how much photography we did. We just loved listening to his stories. And it would have been really interesting to go through France with him. And just through the villages and see how he tells his stories. I mean, his images are remarkable, but it would be really fun to go back into that time as well, but to experience that, but also just to be with that guy.
Well, I just searched for him actually, and he's good. You've made it when you've got a Wikipedia page. And June the 26th, 2000, he passed away. But yeah, I mean, phenomenal stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe Thomas Heaton.
Oh yeah, Thomas Heaton. Yeah, of course, yeah. Spencer, honestly, it's been wonderful. I know that we kind of crossed paths in Czech Republic a few years ago, and never actually got to sit down and meet each other. So
yeah, well, I think we missed each other by a day.
Yeah,
something like that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and we'll catch up again soon, hopefully.
All right, great talk to you.
Spencer Wyn there, and really, truly, honestly, do check out his website and his Instagram. All of the links will be on the show notes, of course. Really a very, very, very good photographer. Okay, book review time, and I'm throwing Gemma to the lines a little bit here. She has the book in front of her, and it's
David Bailey, If We Shadows. Okay, hang on, I'm going in. Preface by George Melly. Who's George Melly?
George Melly, he was the man on the telly, wasn't he? George Melly, the man on the telly.
That's Roger Melly.
Oh.
Sometimes tender and witty, often violent and disturbing, David Bailey's photographs have not lost their power to arouse and shock, nor the aesthetic appeal which makes them linger in the mind. They constitute one of today's most characteristic iconographies. So this is a personal selection of classic work from the 1980s. What do you think of David Bailey, Kev?
Oh, I like David Bailey.
He's a bit scary.
He's very scary. He is the most acerbic person. Okay, flick to a page.
There's a really nice quote by Shakespeare.
Okay.
But I think we've established I'm not very good at reading out loud, so I won't read it. And the first one, like a plaque at a cemetery in loving memory of David Bailey, beloved husband of Olive. So then you turn to the next page, is like a double page of Jack Nicholson doing a pretty... his name in that film. Here's Johnny. Face. Yeah.
Black and whites. What do you think of the black and whites?
I'm not such a fan of those Nicholson pictures, but the next page is a beautiful picture of a stone carving of a hand and a guy, which I'd have to look in the back to tell you who it is. You know who that is? No?
No.
Excellent. But I'll tell you what, the difference is that the emotion in the Jack Nicholson pictures, he's just kind of, he's acting up for the camera. Whereas in this other picture, he's kind of, the guy's turned away. It's really, really grainy. To have like a brownie overtone, do you say?
A brownie overtone.
Yeah, but they're not black and white,
no.
are they?
Yeah, there's a slight golden hue to them. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're right.
Right, I'm going to open the book in the middle. Oh, very beautiful nude sort of top torso pictures of a woman. On one page she's got a towel over her face, the next page she's got a towel on her head. But they are really amazing, aren't they?
Gorgeous pictures.
The texture in the wall and the towel. Do you know what? It is texture, isn't it? Because you've got the texture of her skin, the skin on her shoulder, the texture of the wall behind her, and the texture of the towel. And that's what I really like in photographs. I like the fact that some of the pictures are small and cropped and square. Mm-hmm. And others completely fill the page. Quite a lot of famous people, Mick Jagger, some of the supermodels, and then there's quite a lot of masks and sort of statues. Ooh.
So the ones, I think it's interesting that the shots that are more candid, the ones in the street, the ones, if you just flick back to the page you were on, seem to be, straight on, kind of on-camera flash type style. Whereas his studio shots are obviously much more considered in terms of the lighting. And I think there's, you don't see too much of Bailey's work that is the candid street style, if you like. But there's elements of it in this book.
I quite like, it's quite interesting because it is really jarring. So you've got the studio shots and then you've got like really, really striking iconography. Like there's... a statue of Christ and a close-up of his face with the crown of thorns and blood dripping down his face. next to, you know, an actress outside a hotel, next to an actor smiling, and a quite scary looking sort of death mask. So it's quite jarring. Actually, if you flick through it, it's almost better than going through it page by page. Is it quite an old book?
No. So it's 2001, but the images are relatively old.
1980s, aren't they?
Yeah, and you can. It's a easily obtainable book. It's a big book, nice big, feels good in the hand. It's really well printed, I think, because it is all black and white. So that's really important with books that have black and white prints in them. I think is the printing. Sometimes you lose the shadows too much, and it's a bit oversaturated. But the printing of this is good, and it's a softback as well, as Gemma said. It's a vertical book, so but they haven't butchered the images. They've decided, instead of splitting across pages, that if an image is a horizontal, it's just going to be smaller on the page, and I think that's good. That's Sid Vicious, isn't it?
Next to the picture of a severed pig's head, but a severed pig's head taken from behind, so the cut, so you can see all the innards. It's quite gross, but I don't know. It's one of those images you can't stop looking at, really, because you never see that way round.
So we never really discussed this when we're doing the book reviews, but is this the kind of book that you'd have on your table when you have got guests coming around? Would you be happy for them to pick that up and have a glance? I
don't love it as much as I love some of the books that you've got, but I think it would depend on the mood. It is quite jarring. It is quite, I just turned to a newborn baby being breastfed next to an old woman lying on the street holding a poster of the Virgin Mary. So it's kind of death and life and then a bit of celeb and glamour. Yeah, I can't decide.
It's honest, isn't it? It's honest.
It is very honest.
And I think that's what they're alluding to with the title of the book, If We Shadows. I think it's all about that, the honesty. And in fact, reading the blurb, it says, though these shadows may offend, they also excite and instruct and show us the world of a photographer whose vision has been ever sharpened by time.
You know what, as well, the more I think about it, there's a little bit of history here.
That's Geldof, isn't it? That's Bob Geldof.
It's Bob Geldof with his pass around his neck from the Band-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
Just sort of standing there, the big smile on his face. And next to him is some religious iconography again. And he was called, wasn't he, Saint Bob, and that he was really sort of held up as this sort of angel that was going to save all of these children in Africa. And so now looking back on that, 30, 40 years later, that is quite interesting. That's kind of my era. Oh, we won't talk about that one. I might not leave it on the table when my dad was coming round.
All right, so the book of the week was David Bailey, If We Shadows, and of course we will link to it on the show notes. It is available on Amazon. However, it's very important that you use local booksellers instead of Amazon. Okay, another question. This is from Jeff Petrie, and he says, I've always loved stills photography and have been doing it for several decades. Most contemporary digital cameras are now hybrids that do still photography as well as video. I'd like to try my hand at making compelling, interesting travel, in brackets if we're ever allowed to do that again, and live videos, but haven't a clue what I'm doing. I've searched YouTube and other sources, and most everything that I found tells me what to do, but not how or why to do. Any pointers, tips or suggestions on how to get started? He's not talking about camera settings, as there are plenty of videos on that, more about why or how to get on with it. So Neale obviously would be best to answer this in terms of video making, but I think I would say to you, Jeff, if you really just want to kind of get up and run in, stick the camera on P mode, and I know that's a settings thing, but stick the camera on P mode and just start looking through the viewfinder and see what you find interesting. And when it comes to one of the problems I always have when I'm thinking about making kind of small clips or small films is what will the viewer find interesting? And it's the same as when doing stills, really. If you think about that from a storytelling point of view, the 5 W's, who, why, what, where, when, try and think about that first. Write down, jot it down, what am I telling the story of? Who's in it? Why are they there? What's going on? How am I going to make this thing connect the dots? And, start also thinking about it as a story, in that every good film and, every good story, whether it's a film or whether it's written, will have a start, a middle, and an end. So think about those 3 elements as well, along with the 5 W's. But really, ultimately, I think it's it's down to this idea of, we talked about it earlier, this idea of what interests you mostly. And Gemma spends far more time filming clips on her phone than I do. And what are you looking for? Are you just looking for family memories, or are you what's happening in your head when you're doing that?
Yeah, well, obviously I'm around the kids all the time, and we've got the horse, and we're doing all that kind of stuff, and the kids do funny things, and the dogs, and I'm just doing that. But I think, having lived with Kev the photographer for a long time, overthinking it. And yeah, you can overthink the 5 W's, whatever they are. But who cares? You've got obviously some kit to do it. What makes you laugh? What do you think? I mean, starting from a point of what makes you laugh is always good. We were watching Motherland last night, which is very hilarious, BBC One sitcom. But it's really just about mums at school. And it doesn't have to be even that interesting. I could run around the stables where I am with the kids and the horses and the dogs and probably get 3 minutes of film about horse life, which would probably be quite funny. But I would probably just do that because I'm not a photographer and I'm not overthinking it. So stick a day in your calendar where you're going to make a 3-minute film and go and do it on anything, and then see if you like it or not, and go from there. Because you'll definitely start, and then you'll evolve, and then you'll find your style. But if you don't start, you never will, which is why Kev's going out tomorrow to do some street photography.
But yeah, I mean, Gemma's right, and you're also right, Jeff, about YouTube is often full of how to do this and how to do that, and that's basically because that works in the algorithms, and it makes these people more money. But I would say, as a kind of curveball, leave YouTube, or head away from YouTube and go to Vimeo. Vimeo is far more artistic. I think there's millions of films on there that are just beautiful, and I often just type in black and white film into Vimeo, and I can sit there for hours on end just watching these amazingly creative films. Often they're about travel, often they're about people, there's interviews, there's all kinds of stuff on there, but it's not anything like you'll see on YouTube. That none of it is top 10 tips on how to take a picture and all that kind of stuff. It's just creative, and it's artistic, and it's wonderful. So I'd go to Vimeo and have a gander in there. That might give you some ideas of direction to go on the occasions that I've done kind of videos and films, commercial stuff. That's what I've done. I've gone to Vimeo, left YouTube behind, gone to Vimeo, and that's where I get all of my inspiration for filmmaking from. YouTube is a bit cluttered, really. Okay, how do you think we did? What do you think Neale would give us out of 10?
1 for pressing record.
Oh, shit.
Oh, we're so bad. What time did we start? We started at 3. It's now 10 to 11. Good job the kids are at my mum's. Yeah. Imagine.
Okay, I will. Neale probably will help me for this, but I am going to put some outtakes at the end. Thank you so much once again, everybody, for listening to the Fujicast podcast without Neale this week, and hopefully, please Lord, let him be back next week. Thank you to our interview guest, Spencer Wyn, and the book of the week this week, Gemma, was
If We Shadows by David Bailey.
Indeed it was. Thank you to everybody who helps us out on Patreon. See you in the Facebook group. And don't forget, you can send emails to click@fujicast.co.uk. See you next week.
Bye. Sorry. Bye.
Right, testing 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. This is my mic. This is my mic.
And this is my mic. This is my mic. 1 2 3 1 2 3. This is my mic.
Right. It's me and you, babe.
Didn't spill any on your microphone.
It's a simple sentence. It begins with the word as.
As Reddit mentions, Kevin remembered the human. Respect for others. Respect for others. Kevin often comes across. Okay.
You're married. It's my name. It's easy to remember my name.
Kevin often comes across as a practical person. Stop laughing. I hate you. You read. I can't do it. You do it.
Come on. Just concentrate.
Okay. We'll stop laughing then. Perhaps that's more difficult to define. Would success in this group mean consistent self-satisfaction? You're an asshole. I hate you.
In that functionality. Is that your phone ringing?
Sorry. I'll turn it off. Carry on.
Watch the cables. Come on, you can do it. The next word is the.
Oh, yeah. The run of episodes beginning with the was a. Oh, that's rubbish. You read that sentence.
Enjoyability or on functionality?
That's not even a. Okay. It's a stupid question.